Your vote may already be getting mapped out of existence. Not stolen at the ballot box, not deleted by a machine, not thrown away in secret, just moved. A line shifts here, a neighborhood gets split there, one group of voters gets packed into one district, another group gets cracked across three, and suddenly the election looks competitive on paper while the outcome was mostly decided before anyone voted. That is the redistricting war happening right now. Across the country, states are redrawing congressional maps ahead of the 2026 midterms. And this is not just normal once-a-decade redistricting after a census. This is mid-decade political mapmaking, happening because control of the U.S. House is so narrow that a handful of district lines can decide who runs Congress. Reuters reported that Republican-led states are now positioned to gain as many as 10 House seats through this latest round of redistricting, while Democrats only need to flip 3 Republican-held seats from 2024 to win the House majority. That means the battle for Congress may not start with voters in November. It may start with mapmakers months before voters ever show up. And that is the part people should be paying attention to, because when politicians draw maps, they are not just organizing voters. They are choosing which voters matter more, which voters matter less, and which elections are allowed to be competitive in the first place. Florida is one of the clearest examples. In 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis pushed an aggressive congressional map that helped flip 4 seats to Republicans. They now control 20 of Florida's 28 House seats, and that map shows how one redistricting fight can lock in an advantage for years. Supporters will call that aggressive politics, critics call it a partisan gerrymander, but either way, the practical effect is obvious. Millions of voters may cast ballots in districts designed to produce a result before the campaign even begins. And Florida is not alone. Texas enacted a Republican-backed map targeting 5 Democratic-held seats. A lower federal court blocked it, finding the map was likely an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, but the Supreme Court later cleared the way for Texas to use it in 2026. In North Carolina, Republican lawmakers approved a new map designed to flip a Democratic seat, giving Republicans an advantage in 11 of the state's 14 congressional districts, even though North Carolina remains a politically divided swing state. In Missouri, Governor Mike Kehoe signed a new map dismantling a Democratic-held Kansas City-based seat, giving Republicans the advantage in 7 of the state's 8 districts. So when people say just vote, they are missing the part where the battlefield was already drawn before voters entered it. And yes, Democrats do this too. California Democrats pushed a countermap approved by voters that could endanger as many as 5 Republican-held seats. Utah may give Democrats one more seat after a state judge threw out a Republican-drawn map as illegally partisan. Maryland Democrats considered targeting the state's only Republican member of Congress, though that effort stalled. In New York, a court-ordered redraw of the Staten Island-based Republican seat could have helped Democrats, but the Supreme Court halted that effort for 2026. So this is not a story about one party discovering gerrymandering. This is a story about both parties understanding that control of Congress can be engineered through district lines before the election ever happens. The difference right now is scale and momentum. Republicans appear to be winning this round. Democrats have some counter moves, especially in California and Utah, but several of their efforts have been blocked or stalled. In Virginia, voters actually approved a new Democratic-backed map in a special election, only for the state Supreme Court to step in weeks later and throw it out over a legislative technicality. Reuters described Republicans as having a decided advantage after recent court decisions, including a Supreme Court ruling that weakened protections for majority black districts. And that court piece matters, because redistricting is not just a political fight, it is a legal arms race. Every new map gets challenged. Every lawsuit becomes another attempt to decide which form of manipulation is allowed and which form crosses the line. Is it racial gerrymandering? Is it partisan gerrymandering? Is it vote dilution? Is it legal hardball? Is it unconstitutional? Is it just politics? Those questions sound technical until you realize they decide whether your district is competitive, whether your community stays together, and whether your representative is actually accountable to voters. Louisiana shows where this fight is heading. After the Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's 2024 map, which had created a second majority black district, Louisiana enacted a new map, reducing the state from 2 majority black districts to 1, and likely moving the delegation toward a 5-to-1 Republican split. Democrats and voting rights groups argued that reduces black political power, Republicans argue the map is about partisanship, not race. That distinction matters because federal courts treat racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering differently. If race predominates in drawing a district, courts may apply strict scrutiny, but the Supreme Court has generally said claims of purely partisan gerrymandering are not something federal courts can police in the same way. So in states where race and party overlap heavily, the legal fight often becomes whether lawmakers were targeting race, party, or both. That is the loophole at the center of modern redistricting. If a map weakens voters because of race, courts may step in. But if politicians say they are weakening voters because of party, the legal system often treats that differently. So the same communities can be split, packed, or diluted, and the legal outcome may depend on whether lawmakers can plausibly say they were targeting Democrats instead of targeting black voters, or targeting Republicans instead of targeting white voters, or targeting partisan performance instead of racial identity. That is the ugly logic of modern mapmaking. The line between race and party is treated like a legal firewall, even though in many states those categories overlap heavily in real life. So politicians learn the language. They do not say they are diluting racial groups, they say they are maximizing partisan advantage. They do not say they are weakening a community, they say they are improving electoral performance. They do not say they are choosing voters, they say they are drawing districts, and that is how gerrymandering hides in plain sight. It does not need to look like corruption in a dark room. It can happen in a state capitol. It can happen through software. It can happen with legal memos, consultants, demographic data, and public hearings where the decision was already basically made. That is why Florida matters. That is why Texas matters. That is why North Carolina, Missouri, Louisiana, Wisconsin, and California all matter, because the redistricting war is not really about geography, it is about power. Wisconsin is another piece of that. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has agreed to hear an appeal in a case challenging the state's Republican-friendly congressional districts. Republicans hold 6 of Wisconsin's 8 House seats, but only 2 are considered competitive. The case is not expected to change the 2026 election, but it could create a path to redraw the maps before 2028. That matters because it shows this fight does not stop after one election. If one side loses in 2026, it will look for new maps in 2028. If one court blocks a map, lawyers will find a new theory. If one state redraws aggressively, another state will respond. Every map becomes temporary. Every district becomes negotiable. Every election becomes another excuse to rework the rules. And the voters are expected to pretend this is normal. But it is not normal for elections to be decided by people drawing safer seats for themselves. It is not normal for voters to be sorted like inventory into districts designed to protect incumbents or manufacture majorities. And it is not normal for politicians to openly admit they are redrawing maps to gain seats, then turn around and call it democracy because people still technically get to vote afterward. That is the trick. You still get a ballot, you still get candidates, you still get campaign ads, debates, yard signs, and election night coverage. But if the district was drawn so one side has a built-in advantage of 15, 20, or 30 points, then your vote is happening inside a structure already designed to limit its impact. That is why gerrymandering is so effective. It does not cancel democracy, it cages it. It lets the ritual continue while changing the math underneath. And once the math is changed, politicians stop fearing voters and start fearing primaries, donors, party leadership, and ideological activists. Because in a safe district, the general election is not the real election. The real threat comes from being challenged inside your own party. That makes Congress more extreme, less accountable, and less responsive to normal voters. If a representative knows the district is engineered to protect their party, they do not need to persuade the middle. They need to survive the base. They need to avoid angering the activists. They need to raise money. They need to stay useful to leadership. The average voter becomes less important, and that is where this affects you directly. Because congressional maps decide who writes laws on taxes, healthcare, war, spending, regulation, immigration, energy, surveillance, and government power. If the map is rigged to protect one party or one faction, then the policies that come out of Congress are being filtered through a distorted political system before they ever reach your life. Your rent, your wages, your healthcare costs, your roads, your schools, your privacy, your taxes, all of it runs through political power, and political power runs through district lines. So when mapmakers decide your vote should matter less, they are not just changing election math, they are changing how much influence you have over everything government does afterward. The real story is that American elections are becoming less about persuading voters and more about arranging voters. That is a very different kind of politics, and it is one that the public is barely allowed to see clearly because every side wraps its own map in noble language. Republicans say they are correcting illegal racial maps, reflecting partisan reality, or protecting their voters from Democratic gerrymanders. Democrats say they are restoring fairness, countering Republican gerrymanders, or protecting representation. Sometimes those arguments may be legitimate. Sometimes courts agree. Sometimes maps really are illegal. Sometimes old districts really do need to be changed. But the incentive underneath is still obvious: power. If a map helps your side, you defend it. If it hurts your side, you sue. If courts block it, you look for another route. If another state redraws, you redraw too. And the whole country gets dragged into a mapping arms race where voters are not the customers. They are the raw material. That is why the 2026 midterms are so important. Not because voters will not matter at all. They still matter. Turnout still matters. Candidates still matter. Money still matters. And political mood still matters. A bad enough election environment can break even a carefully drawn map. But the playing field is being tilted before the game starts, and in a House where control can come down to a few seats, that tilt may be enough. If Republicans gain several seats through new maps before voting even starts, Democrats have to win more competitive races just to get back to even. And if Democrats use California and other states to counterattack, Republicans call that a power grab. If courts step in, one side accuses judges of protecting democracy while the other accuses them of stealing elections. Nobody trusts the process because everyone can see the incentives, and that is what makes this so corrosive. The more politicians manipulate the rules, the more voters assume the outcome is fake. The more voters assume the outcome is fake, the easier it becomes for politicians to justify manipulating the rules again. That cycle does not end in a healthier democracy. It ends in a system where every election is treated as illegitimate unless your side wins. And redistricting is one of the quietest ways that system gets built. No dramatic raid, no hacked voting machine, no secret ballot dump, just lines on a map. Lines that decide which voters get grouped together, which communities get split apart, which seats become safe, which seats become competitive, and which party starts the election with extra seats already in its pocket. So the next time someone says just vote, remember this part. Yes, voting matters, but so does the map. Because if politicians can choose their voters before voters choose them, then the election is not starting on election day. It already started in the map room.